Better Beer, they're big contributors to Ain't That Swell. They keep our engines turning, more content, more programs, and just support the crew who support the potty, mate. It's that simple. Keeps us going mad.
Got
Okay,
you,
can you hear
Mike?
me now?
Got you, brother. Perfect.
You got the dulcet tones of my beautiful lavender-laced voice.
Your beautiful bastardized accent. How many countries are in that thing, man?
Well, I tell you, when I was directing country music videos for Roseanne Cash, Johnny Cash's daughter, she said to me, "Michael, you put the cunt back in country." People figure how many cunts there are in that amount of countries in that accent, and then you'll have alienated every female surfer in the world.
Oh, it's an absolute cunt fest. Nah, don't worry about that. I mean,
it has been an absolute cunt fest, I'm happy to say, and I'm like, all right, well, there you go. So now you know where my sense of humor locates itself.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, it's right up our alley. Man, far out. Where to start with you? I mean, you mentioned working.
I want to look at some of the alleys I've been up.
Oh, man, I can't wait to get into this, because just looking at the grand arc of your existence, like, beginning in Cape Town, going on to London, I think New York for a period, the West Coast, like LA, just the eclectic nature of your life and the various scenes and cultures that you've peered in on. And ultimately that's all come to rest in your ability as a filmmaker, which is exceptional. I would say almost peerless in the surfing realm in terms of the two documentaries that you've made, Sea of Darkness and Heavy Water. But I guess it all starts back in Cape Town, so we may as well start there, man. I mean, I'm fascinated by Cape Town. I'm fascinated by South Africa. I've been there 3 times to J-Bay. And, mate, like, talk to us about Cape Town in your youth. I imagine it's the apartheid era back then, and a pretty wild joint. I don't know if it's any less wild now. There's so much insane crime and dysfunction in the slums, and then you've got the white population with the money who are just trying to live somewhat normal lives in the face of this onslaught of insane poverty and dysfunction. But what was it like in your youth?
Well, it was a different kind of wild. So, I mean, I was, my earliest memories of surfing are like I was very young, just a couple of years old. But to begin, my father, the origin story is my father had escaped the Nazis when he was 18, and he was born in Lithuania.
Wow.
And although he had like blonde hair and blue eyes, he was of Jewish descent. So, and he was the only son in the family. And I guess they figured that if, the Nazis got hold of him, they'd kill him, and that would be the end of the line of the Oblowitzes, of which you've probably not heard anybody else with that last name. So I think the Nazis must have got most of them, but they didn't get my father, right? So anyway, it was like in the late 1930s when he took a train from Vilnius through Poland to London. He barely had enough money for a boat ticket from London to South Africa. That his parents had stitched into his overcoat. He was 18 years old, and like I said before, luckily he had blue eyes and blonde hair and he also spoke a number of languages, which I inherited from him. Both my mother and my father were multilingual, multilinguists. So my mom spoke French and English, and my dad spoke German and Hebrew and English and Russian and all this whole conglomeration, Yiddish and crazy languages. So I grew up in this household where everybody was jabbering away in different languages, which was fortunate for me. Anyway, so my dad gets on this train from Vilnius to Poland, and the Nazis are it's right at the beginning of the war, and they're basically pulling anyone off the train that they suspect of being a Jew. They'd like unzip their pants and have a look, and if their penises were circumcised, they shot them on the spot. My dad was always a very cool cucumber, cool as a cucumber. He kept his cucumber cool. Anyway, he was a very good chess and poker player. So he just kept that poker face. They never suspected him because of his blonde hair and blue eyes, but so they never bothered to pull down his trousers. And he made it to Southampton to get in London, bought the ticket to Cape Town, where his father's brother, the only other Oblowitz on the planet, I believe, was living. And but he had no money, so he had no, it was a two-week passage sailing from Southampton to Cape Town across the Atlantic, and he really had no money for food. He played chess and poker for food money, and he was such a good player. By the time he got to South Africa, he had enough money from all the other immigrants on the boat to start his own business in Cape Town at an early age. Wow. So I kind of guess I learned the hustling skills from my dad,
Yeah, he's like, your dad was like the Grant Twiggy Baker of chess and poker. Just like every win was a meal ticket.
Absolutely, every win was a meal ticket, and basically, I love Twiggy, and I completely relate to that. My entire life in traveling around the world making movies and such is every win's a meal ticket. I go from movie to movie. I've never had like a massive hit where I could accumulate enough money to build myself a wave pool or a strange brand of clothing with an obscure name. You know what I mean? It hasn't been lucrative like that for me. It's just been, I've been able to make a nice living and afford a couple of sports cars and things, but in a nice house with a nice wife. But it's definitely every win is a meal ticket for sure, as far as I'm concerned. And those are the movies I do. But anyway, so yes, I relate to Twiggy and I relate to my father, and that's the way I did it. And I was so I grew up in Cape Town. The first time I saw surfing was the very early 60s. I was about, 3 years. My dad had, my dad loved the ocean. He loved the beach. He loved to swim, and he'd learned to swim in the rivers of Lithuania. So there was this expatriate Lithuanian Jewish community in Cape Town who were all prodigious swimmers. One of them was this guy, Aaron Fialkov. I remember his name, and he trained the South African Springbok swimming team. So he was one of my dad's best friends, and I got trained in swimming by him and water polo and all that stuff. So we were on the beach from my earliest memory, I'm about 6 months old. My dad threw me into the ocean at Clifton Beach in Cape Town, and I was just spinning around in the water. I remember seeing all this seaweed kelp and shit flying around. Then I popped up and I could breathe, and my dad said, "See, now you don't have to worry." And I can remember, I don't know, I think I was 3, maybe 6 months. I can remember it as clear as a bell. And that was like my first experience wiping out, I guess, and I popped up. So it was good sign. So I don't know, like early 60s, it must have been 62, 63. I don't know exactly. We were on this beach, Saunders Rocks Beach, which was also the name of my family house. And these guys come down to the beach with these big long boards and a camera, which I didn't know it was a camera. I had no idea what they were doing, but I was already like surfing on air mattresses and shit like that, lilos we call them. And they paddled out to this like rock that was about 300-400 yards offshore, and they surfed it, and they were big waves. That rock later on became known as the Gasworks. It's one of the early big wave spots in Cape Town, in Sea Point, Bantry Bay area. And it was really the first spot where I really surfed, double, triple overhead waves when I was about 14 or 15 with my brother. that was Bruce Brown and Mike Hinson and Robert August. They were like filming scenes for the Endless Summer, and Terry Bullen had that little gray van with the ostriches painted on it that you saw in the Endless Summer, and he was ubiquitous around Cape Town. Terry Bullen. He was always ferrying the young blonde 12 and 13-year-old boys on surf trips up to J Bay and Elands Bay and St. Francis and everywhere. And my dad would never let me go with him because he said, I guess the same aspersions that Derek Riley was casting against Eric Logan were cast against Terry Bullen. He had a sort of fascination with surfing from a perspective of young male participants. So I was never allowed to go on these trips with Terry Bullen, even though I'd become a surfer. As soon as I saw those boards of Mike Henson and Robert August and John Whitmore, the local South African guy, was there, and he started making boards in Cape Town. And so I wanted one. My dad got me a board when I was really young. Before I was a teenager, I had my first 9.6 board. So I've literally been surfing since the 60s, and that was my first sighted a movie camera, and I got my dad, who was a pretty successful businessman, to buy me an 8mm movie camera from when I was about 10. My mom preserved. I still have bags of 8mm film that I shot back then, right, of all sorts of things. So magic shows or whatever I wanted to film. So I just was into filming and surfing since I can remember, right? But I was, when I grew up, I studied photography and fine art at the University of Cape Town. I never really, I did some surfing photography and stuff, but I was really into surfing. I didn't really want to, the waves were good. I didn't want to hang out on the beach and film it and photograph it. I wanted to surf it. I was really into surfing. So I surfed, and there was no crowds back then. We used to surf J Bay with 3, super tubes, like 3 people in the water. Or I lived in a tent in Victoria Bay for months on end. We explored all over Cape Town. We were like the first, me and my crew of guys were like the first guys to surf like the game reserve. I don't know how many spots you surfed in Cape Town, but there's a lot of great left and right point breaks there, and there was a good crew of guys led by Donald and Jonathan Parman, the Parman brothers. They were really good surfers. And Pierce Pittard, these guys, that they were the first guys to surf dungeons. I mean, like way back in the Cascoliers in the late 70s. I mean, we're talking about, when I started surfing, there were no leashes. There were 9.6 boards. And certainly in the early 70s, when boards started getting more refined and shorter, and we started threading leashes through holes in our fins and tying them around our ankles with socks. But there were no we barely had wetsuits. We didn't have inflation vests. We didn't have.
It would have been freezing down there in Cape Town, far out, without a wetty. I think Torquay was bad.
That was how it started. So I was right there in the beginning of surfing in South Africa. We used to take 9.6 boards in and cut them down. I remember it was in 1968. I drove up to the Gunston 500 competition in Durban with my friend Michael Donen, who's now like the Chief Justice of South Africa, but back then he had shoulder-length blonde hair and he smoked like pounds of pot every day, like we used to.
What?
He was a fantastic guy. Mike was a great surfer. He was about 2 years older than me. You had to be 18 to have a car driving license in Cape Town. So, and I was 16. So he was the driver. But we were major potheads back then when it was super illegal. You must remember, we're growing up in apartheid, which is like this, completely fascist, racist regime. It's like if Donald Trump and Putin ruled the world, with the pseudo religiosity and this moral bullshit, you know, this conservative morality, and you know, just all purely for self-aggrandizing, uh, you know, wealth enhancing personal gain.
Yeah.
You know,
Right wing
that's what
evangelical
South Africa was.
capitalism. Yeah.
Yeah, South Africa was like that. It was basically they had this ideology, this racist ideology, but it was essentially a way to make a certain group of white politicians really rich.
Yeah.
You know, that's what it's all about. I mean, fascism has always been about that, and they use
Well
this
said.
ideology. They use this ideology to control the dumb masses, right? You know, so that's just how it is. So that's what South Africa was like. I mean, it was really for someone who had some, you know, who's reading a lot, and as I was, and who had consciousness of of some kind of ethical notion of political behavior. It was really an inhospitable place on the one hand, but it's the surf was so good, and as a white person, the lifestyle was so affluent that I remember I used to just go around thinking, dude, this is like some kind of weird, surreal dream. These poor black people are wandering around the streets in rags, and all of us white guys can surf all day because our parents are getting paid so much money. You know, it was just the most bizarre place to grow up in. And I have three movie projects that I want to do there. One is one that I've been working on with Duma Farrenford, you know, Geordie's manager.
Of course, yeah.
The Duma's a great guy, and we've been putting together a history of South African surfing, just because I was there from the beginning, you know. So that's gonna really, and you know, we speak people like Cas Collier and Mikey February's dad, and I mean, there was a solid colored and black surfing community coming up in the '60s at the same time as I was, and we knew those guys, and they would surf at places like the Cemetery at 9 miles down on the coast of Strandfontein by Muizenberg, Gordons Bay, that area. Really heavy shark infested waters, but they were all surfing. There was that community, but it was apartheid was so divisive. You know, it was if you associated with black surfers, you could get arrested. There were beaches. One beach in Seapoint, where I grew up, there was a beach that was reserved for black people, blacks only. Whites went on that beach, they would get into trouble. If blacks went on the white beaches, they would get arrested because of the inequity of the distribution of punishment. So it was just a fucking weird place to grow up in. But it was always sunny and hot. Even when it was raining, the sun would always come out. And when it was raining, the waves would just be massive because of those storms that kept up down there. It was just a primordial place to live, you know. And we just surfed. My brother and I, Jonathan, who just recently passed away, we would surf so many extraordinary breaks by ourselves, you know, for days on end. You know, did you ever go to a place called Eland's Bay? It's up on the west coast. It's before you get to Skeleton Bay. It's a left. It's like a left point break. Fantastic left point break, right? I think Gig Saliers lives up there. It's really, but back in those days, it was desolate. You know, like the ends of the Kalahari Desert would like come down to the ocean, like the same in Skeleton Bay. You know, basically desert. Like it's like Joshua Tree in California, except the desert rolls right to the ocean, and then the ocean is freezing cold, and it's got these fucking 8-foot left barrels that just go endlessly in this white, green, foamy water. It was extraordinary growing up there. I mean, we knew we were surfing the best waves in the world all by ourselves. You know, it's like Twiggy and, you know, Sean Thompson and Michael Thompson and, you know, Travis Logie and Geordie Smith, all the great South African surfers over the years, and Matty McGilvery, Stephen Sawyer, they've all shown, our waves are just so consistent, right? We surf anywhere. You know, there's no place that a South African surfer can't adapt to because the waves are so heavy where we grew up, you know?
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
remarkable.
we've got everything from like Nazare type waves in Cape Town, huge outer reef, 80-foot walls of death, to racing point breaks like J Bay or Skeleton Bay. And the only difference between, say, Hawaii and Indo in South Africa is the temperature of the water in South Africa is so cold, right? And the great whites are so prominent that there's this whole extra thrill dimension, right? This adrenaline dimension of just getting into the water. You know, you got to wear a hood and boots. And back when we were young, we started out. We would wear rugby jerseys and sneakers. You know, we didn't even have, you know, just because the rock dance was so intense. You notice surfers from Cape Town all wear boots when they, you know, rubber booties. You know, you don't see them too often surfing barefoot because we're just used to surfing in booties because the water is so cold and the barnacles on the rocks are so sharp, you know. So generally it was a kind of, you know, manly place to grow up in, even for the girls who were surfing. You have to be tough to surf the Atlantic coast of Cape Town for sure. You know?
It's incredible, man. Yeah, Africa. I actually just watched How Surfers Get Paid, season 2, episode 1. Featured Grant Twiggy Baker. It's this new Stab series, and yeah, Geordie Smith just talking about the fact that there is no doubting that Africa really is the last great frontier of surfing in terms of finding perfect uncrowded waves. And the reason being, like, the continent is just so mired in poverty and this post-colonial hangover that so few people surf there. Like, it's the craziest thing about South Africa. Like, the crowds are so low compared to somewhere like Australia, given the quality of waves. So I can.
Well, it's because it's a tough. It's like you said right at the beginning. It's a tough place to live, even though there's this immense disparity between, you know, white wealth and black poverty, right? Which is a massive hangover from apartheid that they can't really seem to cure, right? There's also 20 million or so black people and only about 5-6 million white people. So, you know, there's a lot of white people, but there's not that many. You know, the South Africa is a few thousand square miles. It's pretty big, but it's, you know, it's big as Australia. And then they got the rest of the continent, which is just rife with violence and, you know, Islamic State terrorists roaming around and Russian Wagner militant groups. And I mean, it's all fucking good. It was always like that, though. I mean, even back in the day when you had Cuban mercenaries in Angola and Mozambique, which has incredible surf, was a communist country. And, you know, the South African army was defending the white interests against these. And that, you know, that's how I ended up leaving South Africa. It wasn't because I didn't like surfing there. It was because at 18, I was, you know, forcibly drafted into the army. Everybody was compulsory army. And that was no joke. In like the 1970s, you know, being in the army in South Africa, you had a good chance of coming back without an arm or a leg if you came back at all, right? And I did my first 3 months of basic training, and they sent us out into the desert in these trenches, and there were fucking bullets flying over my head, and like I'm going, fuck, people are getting fucking killed here. You know, it was like insane. And I was just lying in this trench, shitting myself, thinking, I don't want to be here, right? I just spent like months living up in J Bay and Vic Bay in a tent, and I was been surfing. And, you know, when I arrived at the army, my hair was on my shoulders, and the first thing they did was they just take a fucking razor and brutally shave off all your hair. It was like this horrible place, dude. Like, just filled with everything that like a late 60s, early 70s punk rock hippie hated, you know? And, luckily, I still had from the early days of surfing, where, you know, because I was such a heavy longboarder back in the day, I had huge bumps on my knees and my ankles, you know, from kneeling on those old 9'6" longboards. And so after about a few months of sheltering in the trenches of, you know, watching, I mean, some of these guys would just freak out. You know, it was like 100-degree weather, and you'd been in this fucking trench with your whole pack all day, sheltering from bullets of Cuban mercenaries flying over your head. And eventually some guy would freak out and he'd jump up and there'd be blood everywhere and he was dead. You know, I was going, fuck this, dude. I'm going to get out of here really fast.
Wow.
So I remember, like, you know, we used to, somehow we managed to smuggle pot into the army tents, and we'd break bottles, you know, like Coke bottles or wine bottles, and we'd stuff the neck up with grass, and we'd all go out and smoke it, like in the bush late at night, in between these forays into death, trying to figure out how we were going to get out of there. And I remember looking at stoned out of my brain, looking at my ankles and seeing these big bumps from surfing. And I went, aha, that was my aha moment, which probably saved my life. And I went to the commandant, because luckily, like I said at the beginning of this, I could speak Afrikaans fluently. I had all this language ability from my dad and my mom. So, you know, I befriended the right-wing commandant and spoke to him in dulcet Afrikaans tones about how much I love defending my homeland and my country. But unfortunately, the boots, the army boots, were making these gigantic big bumps on my ankles, and I could barely walk, you know, and I was like hamming it up how, like, I couldn't walk. And the guy was like looking at this, and then he took me to the doctor, and they were all like peer. They hadn't seen anything like it because there weren't that many surfers in South Africa back in those days, right? And they concluded that I needed to go on permanent light duty because obviously my little Jewish wuss white ankles weren't capable of defending the country in these heavy leather commando boots. So they dispatched me off to the gay section of the army, right? Where they had all the guys who were gay were in light duty, and there I met one of my best friends.
Well, that's a good idea. Let's put all the gay guys together and see what happens. A gay platoon.
Yeah, so they had a whole bunch of the gay guys, and then me with my weird big swollen ankles, and they just left us in the tent all day, right? Because we were on permanent light duty because we were considered unfit for service, right? And the one guy I met there, Basil Jones, became one of South Africa's top theater designers, like puppeteer. He has a company called Handspring Puppet Companies, a lifelong friend of mine, a fantastic guy, right? We ended up going to university together and studying fine art. And, so it was just, circumstance. So after about a few months of being in the gay tent, with my big surfer bumps on my ankles, they sent me home. So I went to university for a year or two. I studied fine art. I met like Basil. I met the other great painter, Marlene Dumas, who's like one of the greatest painters in the world today. We all became really close friends, and we really engaged actively in the struggle against apartheid. We were all super political. I don't know how we didn't end up in jail, but I got the fuck out of South Africa as fast as I could. I realized that they gave me like a 2-year exemption, and then I would have to go back to the army. And I told my father that I was leaving. And as soon as I finished university, I got on a plane and I went to London, and I knew I wasn't going to come back. I couldn't go back for 10 years. I was a real army draft dodger. And I had to make it all happen, that way. So by then I'd done a lot of documentary photographs, black and white photographs. A lot of the times on my surf trips, I would go into like black locations, or like the Transkei, which was a fake black plebiscite country that the apartheid government wanted to put all the black people in this weird country that had no resources inside South Africa, so they could. It was, it was basically forced labor. I mean, it was just a slightly more humane version of how the Nazis used concentration camps to create forced labor. But that was South Africa, So I got the fuck out of there. I went to London. I got a job working as a photographer straight away at the London Sunday Times. My mother was British, so she had a British passport, so I could stay in London. And I started exploring Europe a bit. It was I saw waves, but it was freezing cold, and I had this really close friend of mine, Anton Fig, who I grew up with, who also surfed with me when we were young. And he was at music school and he just graduated. He was in New York City, and he said, "Come to New York." And I was fascinated with New York art. I'd studied art. I did a little bit of studying in London, photography, and tried surfing there. It was fucking freezing cold. I couldn't stand it. And I knew about guys like Ricky Rasmussen, so I knew there was some kind of waves in New York. And what are you doing?
Oh no, go ahead. Just turning the heater off. It was a bit noisy.
All right. And then I took a plane to New York City. I'd already in London. I saw the Sex Pistols do their first concert at the 100 Club, and I knew about the Ramones and Patti Smith that had started to emerge in New York City. Remember, there's no internet in those days.
Hold on. Let's press pause on this Sex Pistols gig for a second, because that was I saw that you did go to university in London, or were working in London, and it was the mid '70s. So you've got that beginnings of punk rock music, namely the Sex Pistols, basically the godfathers of the genre. Johnny Rotten's one of my all-time idols and gurus, an Irish labourer, piece of shit, fucking, absolute shit kicker, whose entire body of work and music was just a piss take of the class system, and the ethos of which very much survives in this podcast. Talk to us about seeing the Sex Pistols live and just that culture at the time.
Well, I tell you, but the bottom line of all of this is growing up in South Africa, we had only local rock and roll and incredible black music, right? Dollar Brand, Ladysmith, Black Mambazo, all those great black music bands. But we were really politically left-wing and active in South Africa, right? Because we were anti-apartheid. And we saw all these big 60s guys like Bob Dylan and Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones as being sellouts, right? They're all made hundreds of millions of dollars. And they looked like a bunch of kooks to us, frankly. They were just like radio FM music for the masses, posing as radicals. And it was all bullshit, right? As far as we were concerned, they'd ripped off black artists. All their music came from the black blues. Everybody from Bob Dylan on down was a fucking cultural thief and had appropriated music.
I love it.
And they all made a fuck of a lot of money by stealing from black musicians. And just to jump ahead, later on, when I became a big music video director in America, I felt like I was one of those black musicians, because we got paid fuck all to do music videos in the early days of music video. They never put our names on the videos. We never got any royalty checks. And those videos are still playing on YouTube with 10, 20 million follows, and we don't get a penny for them, right?
Wow.
And that's exactly how I imagined all those early black blues guys felt, right? So there was nothing political about Bob Dylan or the Stones or any of those guys by the time that I arrived in London. They were, I remember going to see Eric Clapton. He was so smacked out he could barely stand up. He would
fucking just look clapped out and smacked out Clapper. What a dog!
He just looked like an absolute fucking degenerate with $100 million in the bank, and his band were the ones playing. He was just slobbering around on stage, drooling. He looked like a fucking moron. Later on, I got to work with him. I did a video with him and Carole King. He was already sober by then. And he just struck me as an absolute conservative right-wing capitalist, which they were. These guys had made so much money. They had transcended from the left-wing hippie political classes into the moneyed elite of capitalism. That's what they were.
Brah.
I would have, I guess, if I'd made $100 million stealing music from black people, I'd be part of the bourgeois capitalists too. But that didn't happen. So reading, hitting London in like 75, 76, and like reading these, like, again, there's no internet, so there's just these amazing one sheet newspapers that are being, all over the place, like with pictures of spiky haired kids with safety pins in their necks and weird tattoos. And to me, it was all led by a guy called Genesis P. Orridge, who later on had some kind of sex change.
Genesis Porridge?
Yeah, Genesis P. Orridge.
Genius.
Right? He was
Love that.
Total genius. And he is like psychic revolution, right? And there was the movies of Jean-Luc Godard. There was just so much active anti-capitalist agitation going on. There was the Red Brigades were blowing up fucking airports and shooting people. It's weird. All of this right-wing terrorist tactics now are basically adopted from the ultra-left, radicals from that period, right? Which is just, as you get older, you just realize what a mess, culture and mankind is, right? It's just really surreal how fucked up the trajectory of history is, and how, things just, move and change in this weirdly plastic way. And, in London, not only was I getting turned on to punk rock at university, I was studying with Peter Wallen, who wrote a book called Signs and Meanings in the Cinema. And he was a radical left-wing cultural theorist. And he introduced me to Michel Foucault and Roland Barthes and Christian Metz and all of these radical left-wing thinkers, right? Mm-hmm. And Peter had also written the screenplay for Michelangelo Antonioni's movie The Passenger. And he was a super left-wing filmmaker making these radical anti-commercial movies. So I got with his wife at the time, Laura Mulvey, and I really loved these people. They were so radical and so intellectual. And, it was just like, and punk rock was happening. And, there was this attack on the upper classes, and people were squatting. We would find these, remember, I'm in my early 20s, right? My shoulder length hair. And I used to wear an old army surplus pilot's jumpsuit that my girlfriend at the time had embroidered flying on the back, right? And we were just fucking flying, dude. It was radical. So good.
It's so good.
And I was always photographing and shooting Super 8 film all the time. I have, like, somehow, thankfully capitalism provided me with enough money that I have a massive studio in the back of my house, just where I'm archiving all this shit. And because I've been working nonstop my whole life. Like I said, I had to go from one meal to another. I never really had, I had a couple of gallery shows. I was in the Museum of Modern Art and shit like that.
Wow.
And they bought some of my stuff in New York and that, but I really just like to keep working, So now that I'm in my, like, old age, I'm starting to archive the stuff. And, I found a really hip young gallery owner, this guy Stevie Dreer. He's like he represents Dead Kooks surfboards in Los Angeles, and he has an art gallery. Him and Luke Cheadle, called 2 to 3 Fair, and they do really extreme, cutting edge art shows. And so I think we're gonna start unveiling some of my crazy artworks. I've always
love that. I know Luke Cheadle.
Luke, right?
Yeah, he's I don't know if we've met, but I know who he is. He believe he's kind of like a pro junior level surfer here in Australia.
Good surfer,
really good surfer.
A really interesting guy. Anyway, so they got a cool buzz going into their place. And because I have, because I came from that generation who were like really, boundary breaking punk rockers, we were all into like crazy sexual exploration, like the Robert Mapplethorpe was our kind of guru, You know, I did a lot of S&M photographs. It was all part of that Vivienne Westwood look, you know, wearing vinyl and you know, bondage outfits and all that stuff. It was a complete revolt against all the fucking navel gazing hippie bullshit, you know, yoga hippie bullshit, right? I mean, we were hardcore, you know. I mean, I guess they traded cocaine for crystal meth or something in my generation. I mean, there used to be like bags of fucking crystal meth all around London. That's all I can remember, that just like fucking craziness going on for days on end, and like, you know, like pogo dancing and all this, you know, these incredibly violent Sex Pistol concerts, drunken madness. It was, I mean, seeing Johnny Rotten on stage the first time was nuts, dude. With these spiky orange hair and his like ripped up old dirty stank sewer sweater that he, you know, it was like, dude, it was nuts. But it was such a great energy to be part of, you know, like imagine coming out of dour hippie left-wing apartheid South Africa, right? Art world, intellectual, surfing, yoga. You know, I was definitely, we were all into yoga and all that shit back then. And then I just hit London and this fucking, you know, it was like sympathy for the devil, you know? I mean, even the Rolling Stones, everybody was getting reborn by this shit. You know, punk rock, I think, is what made Keith Richards who he was. You know, you had to see people take what he was into and turn it on itself, you know what I mean, and make it edgy and really edgy.
Yeah,
you know,
it's like the Billy Bragg lyric, you know, which side are you on? Like the idiocy and the injustice of the class system is so in your face in every colonial white society that like you have to choose a side. So which one is it going to be?
And that's what happened later on with when I did Sea of Darkness. You know, I was not prepared to make the great white colonial explorer movie, right, which is what Martin wanted, and that's the reason why Sea of Darkness has never been released. You have it right there, I just told you.
Yeah,
right, it's because of that, because I'm not defending fucking white colonialism and the rape of indigenous people's lands for profit, right? I'm gonna tell it like it is. Yeah, there were a bunch of fucking, you know, hippie surfers who survived of drug dealing. So that they, you know, they were absolute narcissists. That was what they did. You know, surfing is the most narcissistic sport. I mean, it serves no other function other than pure pleasure. You know, it's like going to an orgy, right? What are you going to an orgy to change the world? No, we're going to an orgy to have pure pleasure, right? Surfing is that orgy of pure pleasure, right? And all the petty jealousies, all the petty cultural colonialist attempts at appropriation and aggrandizement of the individual self against the whole, they all take place in surfing. You go to a crowded day at First Point, Malibu, or I'm sure at Kira or Bondi, any beach where there's like 100 surfers in the water, and you'll just see the society writ small manifesting itself in every violent fucking outburst, right? And that's the beauty and the tragedy of the whole thing.
100%, man. It's so true. And, you know, when you mention just the endless mire of bullshit that is kind of modern society, particularly in the white kind of capitalist colonial realm, like at the end of the day, all of this, whether you're a Marxist rebel blowing up bridges or a right-wing capitalist fascist keeping the blacks in South Africa down, it's all just manifestations of the ego. And in our culture, in the white kind of materialist reality, there's just no thought or work done to dissolve and sand back the ego. So egos just run wild, and it becomes this just dogmatic, divisive world that we live in. And it's been that for so long. It's just two egomaniacs, whether they're left or right wing, you know, as the American Indians say, the left and right wing are part of the same bird. They're just two dogmatic, ego-driven states of thinking at war with each other. And surfing is that on an individual level, because it's me versus you in the lineup. And I want this resource, and I'm going to get this resource over you. I'm not going to give you this resource. So, yeah, the human ego, man, when left to its own devices just spirals constantly and consistently into this state of war with one another, with whoever is competing for your resource. That's basically what it boils down to. It's that simple. But then you see the other cultures.
Well, no, it's what Jean-Luc Godard said in the mid-70s. You know, there's like, he said two really amazing things. He said movies have a beginning, a middle, and an end, just not necessarily in that order. And he said the left and the right have become interchangeable with each other at this point in society. You can't take a side against a left or a right because they're both replications of each other politically, right? And obviously there's degrees of that you can measure and assess, but ultimately I think that's what gave birth to the really great postmodernist philosophers like Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari from France, who wrote this book, Anti-Oedipus. If you haven't read Anti-Oedipus, that should be your Bible. You should read that book, and it will tell you that there are no Bibles. And that's what you want. It's the anti-Bible, right? You want to understand how the biological flow of culture is just like a pulsating mirror of how all organisms work and how viruses change and mutate, and you can't just take sides anymore because you're living in a mutating viral world. Like, you know, William Burroughs in The Naked Lunch said, language is a virus, right? And it's a virus used to control. And that controlling virus mutates and changes. And it's no surprise we have fucking COVID, you know? Of course, COVID is fucking real. It's as real as it's unreal, just like every other controlling thing in our society is both real and unreal. And now you have this fucking moron, Donald Trump, you know, standing up there going, well, it's all lies. And you know what? He's telling the truth. It is all lies, except his truth is the lie, right? So
it's a great point.
Put this fucking massive, fat, capitalist load of blubbering shit in prison for life. Why not, right? He lived in a fucking mansion for 60 years with hundreds of billions of dollars. Let him experience the dialectical antithesis of it's all lies, right? The whole idea behind living the revolutionary, viral, feral life is to be able to mutate and change and keep ahead of ambition, desire, ego, all of these things that are going to pull you down and eventually trap you, so that even if you're the great profligator of alleged freedom like Donald Trump, you're going to end up in a fucking courthouse like he is today. Because getting back to Bob Dylan, who I shit talked earlier, he did write in one of his early songs, sometimes even the president of the United States has to stand naked. Right. And he did write that. He was a punk rocker. He started out as a punk rocker, you know. He just got too rich.
Yeah, influenced by it, no doubt. I mean, how could you not be being in those parts of the world like New York in the 70s?
Man, he was just imagine he was in New York in the 50s and early 60s when they had no fucking money, right? And nobody knew this whole thing was going to blow up, right? And that's when he wrote lines like, sometimes the president of the United States has to stand naked, because they were just looking down the barrel of a fucking gun, you know, pointed at them by J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI. And they really did blow the whole thing up. And what we're seeing right now in all this chaos all over the world is, this is the consequence of 1968's revolution. It's all fucking blowing up. This fucking moron, Vladimir Putin, who I once met with Steven Seagal, you know, like desperately trying to hang on to power. I've actually seen these people. I mean, Putin's like a fucking, 4'11", maybe 5'3", like little dwarf with piercing blue eyes, desperately overcompensating for his 2-inch cock. You know, I mean, that's what it's all about, man.
It really is, yeah.
Like, read Sigmund Freud. He wasn't, fuck all this fucking feminist chatter, this divisive shit. You know, everybody needs to have their little tight categories that they can put their ideas in, their little package, you know, so they can be all woke and, you know, worry about, you know, whose indigenous land they've stolen. And, we are surfers on, I don't know how to say it in indigenous Australia language, but, you know, we are surfers on Wollongong land or whatever they say, right? And they admit that. But I don't see any of them giving back their $30 million mansions to
Exactly,
the
mate.
original inhabitants of Wollongong land.
That's what it's all about. The left-wing politics can be so easily distilled, and really what it's about is the redistribution of wealth. It's all it's about. All the woke politics.
And nobody's redistributing the wealth.
Of course. And they're never going to talk about redistributing the wealth, and that'll never become a mainstream Guardian-backed left-wing idea these days. Like, that was part of the old left, the Billy Bragg, the Sex Pistols eras. You know, it was all about socialism, trade unions, redistribution of wealth. Very simple messaging. And now that's been completely lost in this miasma of horseshit around woke identity politics, where the left has been fractured into a million competing little victim particles. And it just doesn't need to be that complicated.
But this is why you need to study post-structuralist, postmodernist writers like Deleuze and Guattari and Paul Virilio, who wrote about war, and Jean Baudrillard. There was a magazine that I worked in that I edited with Catherine Bigelow at Columbia University called Semiotext. That was published by this great genius and my huge mentor, who's also passed away now, Sylvain L'Étranger. And he really taught us about this, the viral nature of all these ideas. These ideas would mutate and change. And, you know, you're always teetering on the brink of darkness and disease and catastrophe, and this kind of utopian notion that there's some wonderful new universe that we're going to have is all fucking bullshit, you know? Find yourself a fucking tent near a good warm water Point Break. Make sure there's no Russian fucking developers around, and go fucking surf. You got the internet. You can make work anywhere, you know? You know, there was a lot in the ideas of Mike Boyum and Martin Daly that were very inspiring. It's just the utopian nature of that kind of dream is just not viable in this world where, you know, the nature of nature is to destroy and destruct. I mean, those, you know,
and capitalize
those wild animals that you know that crawled through the jungle at G-Land late at night, right? They're all over the fucking place, dude. You know, That's the nature of nature. Hey, listen, Jed, I need to hit the heads quickly. Can we
go for it?
Can we just stop for a second? You want me to keep us rolling?
Yeah, go for it, man. I'll do the same.
Okay. You know what I'm thinking, right? Because it's like 2:30 and I have to be at a film to tape transfer on this music video that I just shot in half an hour. Do you want to pick it up tomorrow and let's talk about surfing and documentaries? I've got a lot to talk about the Sonny Garcia thing, because the Sonny Garcia documentary is really focusing on everything we've discussed and the kind of fractious nature of surf industry and colonialism and the exploitation of indigenous surfers, right?
Yeah.
In fact, that Kelly Slater would never, ever allow me to do an interview with him for the Sonny Garcia movie, even though he is like, supposedly was Sonny Garcia's close friend, right? Sonny and I tried so many times. Right there between the dialectic between Kelly Slater and Sonny Garcia is you have the key analysis of the kind of punk rock understanding of corporate capitalism and surfing. Right there between those two people is where I see it, like located. Sonny was really aware of that, and I have amazing interviews where he talks about that and the exploitation of his career and the fact that he was a person of color and how Kelly Slater won his titles by default. I mean, you got to listen to this shit. It's like, so I think I have, I'm getting, you know, the problem with the Sonny Garcia documentary is it never ends, because Sonny Garcia's life is just this perpetuating, extraordinary, narrative of revolt and antagonism, even to this day. You've seen the Free Sonny Garcia 2 Instagram, right? Haven't you?
I don't think I have. Sorry.
All right, so this is your homework to do, and then we can pick it up tomorrow. Go look at Free Sonny Garcia 2, because I already had one shut down, and you will read in the public domain all of the stuff that I've known about for the last few years since Sonny's demise, but I didn't want to address publicly, even though Derek and them would ask me about it, because I didn't want to get into a lawsuit with that woman. But now it's like in the public sphere, and which really allows me to probably take the documentary through its third act, you know? So I'm still actively working on that. Yeah, it's going to be
incredible, man. Incredible. Yeah, there's so much more in your career I want to talk about. So yeah, love to.
That's what I'm thinking. It's like I'll never get it done, and I've got to drive all the way to fucking Beverly Hills, and I got the swell's 1 foot, and I got my fucking longboard on the top of the car, and I'm going, where the fuck am I going to park this fucking thing? And I'm just, anyway, whatever. So let me go deal with all this shit that I got to deal with, and then if you want to, we'll pick this up. Send me a new invite for tomorrow, and we'll pick it up tomorrow, like at 1 o'clock or whatever. Okay.
Perfect. Yeah, it might just have to be a little bit later. Just
let me know.
All right.
Just let me know. I'll check out the surf. You know, while the strike is going on, I just sort of plan my life around surf sessions. You know, even if I have to go and, you know, fuck up a few guys at like First Point Malibu. Some fucking cunt wrote "kook" on my window of my Ford Bronco in wax the other day. Me and the local boys are trying to find out who the fuck it was. It must be someone that I burnt. I burn a lot of people. Listen, when you get to my age, if you're my age and you can still fucking surf, you can burn who the fuck you want. That's the way I see it. I'm looking at these fucking cunts, these like little, you know, 18 to 25-year-olds. I'm going, dude, I'm 70 and I'm still fucking dripping, okay?
Yeah.
You know what you're going to do when you're 70? You're going to be like a fat fucking pig with a heart attack with 6 stents, because there's only 3 of us in the fucking water here, and one of them's Alan Sala and the other's Andy Lyons, right? So you know how good we could surf when we were your age, you fucking kooks? Dude, the Malibu thing, this whole Hollywood entitled shit, I could give a podcast just talking about those assholes.
Oh, I can imagine, mate, how radical a place that is. Far out. That's insane. Yeah, the level of wealth and privilege and the weird social matrix that accompanies that realm.
And they all dress like they're poverty-stricken 60s hippies driving around in their beat-up van life vans, you know?
Sounds like Byron.
You know, while they get... Oh, it's exactly like fucking Byron, dude. I spent a lot of time. I surfed the pass with Peter McCabe. It was one of the best surf sessions of my fucking life.
No way.
Dude, getting barreled backside of the pass, like with Peter paddling up the wave. It was when we were doing Sea of Darkness, and I went, fuck, Peter McCabe just saw me get a backhand barrel. And he came to me and said, you surf pretty good, Mike. I took that as one of the best compliments of all time. Right?
Are you serious? Getting worded up by Peter McCabe, mate. That is peak experience right there.
Peter wanted us to go together on a wave and do go behinds, and I chickened out. I thought, I can't do this with fucking Peter, dude. He's too good, you know. I mean, he's just one of the greatest surfers of all time. That
100%. One of the greatest core lords of all time.
Legendary motherfucker, dude. That legendary guy. What really made Sea of Darkness a great movie was meeting Peter McCabe, right? He just turned the whole thing around and he hooked me up with Jeff Chitty, and you know, we really got deep into the Mike Boehm thing. And I think that's when I kind of lost Martin Daly's confidence, you know, and it wasn't going to be a movie about the Great White Explorer, and it was going to be a movie about drug smuggling.
Mate, I'm so glad it was that film, because it was so omnipresent. The drug trap, the people in my own family are exactly from that era and tied up in the same nefarious activities. It was everywhere. In the 70s and 80s in Australia, you couldn't go to a beach without finding a handful of traffickers. So,
dude, I used to go surf in Hawaii. I go down to the beach, and so these are still some of my closest friends to this day. You go down to the beach. I wouldn't even name the beach or anything, because I went there, and you have a good session, and afterwards it'd be your buddy would have a big bottle of blow in the fucking car, and you'd do a few lines. And dude, those were some of my greatest memories. All right, listen, Jed, let me go because I don't want to be late for the session that I'm planning.
I'll speak to you tomorrow.
Send me a thing. We'll carry on this story. Give me a transcript of this. I could write my autobiography.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I'll well, fuck, I'm not typing up a transcript, but I'll get
No,
some
just give me send me the tapes and I'll find something fucking to do.
that's 100% a possibility. I can definitely do that, mate. I'll speak to you tomorrow, and yeah, take care
I
on the
look
roads
forward
out
to
there.
it.
Unreal.
Yeah,
Good on ya.
glad you're a radical left-wing fucking radical kook. I love it. All
That's
right.
right. All right.
We'll search and destroy more next week, okay?
Excellent,
Not
mate.
tomorrow.
All
All
right.
right, ciao.
See you, brother.
Bye. What time is it in your neck of the woods?
It's 6 a.m.
Goodness gracious. Hold on, I've got to eat my breakfast then. Hold on. 6 a.m. Have you been up all night?
No. I just woke up this morning at 5 and got the fire going, did a bit of Wim Hof, and yeah,
It's
frothing,
freezing
man.
cold out. Where are you? Which part of the world of Australia?
I'm up near Ballina, so just west of Ballina. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's like near, like, on the Gold Coast there, right?
Yeah, about an hour south of the Goldie. Yeah.
So my really old friend Gunter Rahm lives in Ballina. You know,
Mate,
the surfboard show?
it's funny you say that because I was talking about chatting about this interview, and my mate was glassing your boards here actually through Gunter.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, because Gunter and I have been friends since we were about 10 years old.
That's crazy.
We
Gunter's
grew up in Cape Town.
yeah, so Gunter's from Cape Town too. Gunter's an iconic shaper, man. Wow.
Well, I don't ride pieces of shit, bro. When you've been surfing as long as I do, I mean, I'm putting my life in those boards' hands. I mean, those are he shapes my boards for Hawaii and stuff. Like really, he shapes really good. I wouldn't say I ride big waves, but for me, big. Like 6 foot sunset.
Yeah.
That's plenty big for me. Or pipe or Rocky Point. I mean, his boards fly on the North Shore. He spent a lot of time on the North Shore, So
Yeah.
he's a really, really great shaper. I mean, he shaped me a 710. I got a couple I have them all the way from like 6'3" up to, I think the biggest one's like 8'2",
Oh,
and they're just
mental.
incredible boards, for an old man. He knows just how to get the right thickness so that they buoyant enough to paddle, and then he gets these great rail lines so that you can still turn them. Yeah, he's a fantastic shaper.
He's a
Fuck,
genius.
dig this. Robbie Robertson of the band just died. You remember the
Right.
band? You remember the band?
I was never into the band. I don't know the band. Tell us about the band.
You know the band? I pulled into Nazareth. I was feeling about half past dead. Just needed a place where I could lay my head. Hey, mister, can you tell me where a man might find a bed? He just grinned and he shook his hand and head and his nose all he said. You know that
Wow.
song, Take a Load of Annie, Take a Load for Free,
Oh,
Take a Load
yeah. Of course. I
you
know the
put a load
chorus.
right on me. It's only one of the greatest songs ever written,
Of
right?
course. Yeah.
You know the band. I mean, he's like,
I know the band.
I mean, it's not this bullshit that your fucking young idiots do today, you young cunts. So the fucking note. I mean, dude,
That's tragic.
Robbie Robertson was Bob Dylan's guitar player for most of the 60s and early 70s.
Wow.
The band is one of the most iconic rock groups of all time.
Man.
They were all heavy heroin takers, like a needle in each arm. So most of them are dead now. I think there are only two living. Like, let's see, Levon Helm, the drummer, is dead. Richard Manuel is dead. Rick Danko is dead. Funnily enough, the one who's still living now is the organ player, Garth Hudson, who was the oldest member, because he was this weird kind of. They're all from like weird extreme parts of Canada and the backwoods of Louisiana. They're like country kind of guys, really incredible musicians. And Robbie Robertson was also Martin Scorsese's best friend. He scored all of Scorsese's movies, most of them.
Really?
Scorsese's going to be really, really depressed about this.
That's heavy. My favorite Scorsese movie is Gomorrah. You ever read the have you seen Gomorrah? You read the book Gomorrah?
Gomorrah.
Gomorrah?
Gomorrah.
Are you familiar with Roberto Saviano's work? He's been in Witness Protection.
Gomorrah is that big TV series about crime in Italy, right?
So Gomorrah is a book written by the journalist Roberto Saviano from Naples, and ever since he wrote that
about the Naples gangs, right?
Yeah, it's about the mafia.
Scorsese didn't direct Gomorrah, the TV that
No,
big
he did. He made a film in 2009 called Gomorrah, based on the book, and then the TV series is fairly recent.
Oh, hold on a second. I have to check your facts here because I know most Scorsese movies. And hold on, you could be right. Hold on, let me move your face up there. Go to the fact checking.
Because it's
I know the TV series.
The TV series is unbelievable. And Roberto Saviano, the journalist, it's a crazy story. Like Saviano, he was a journalist working in Naples, which is the home of the mafia and the poorest part of Italy. And he wrote that book because he just had a gutful of what was happening. Like he was just constantly reporting on the gratuitous violence and thuggery of mafia. And then he just, like most people living in Naples.
Hold on, stop right there. Gomorrah is a 2008 Italian crime film directed by Matteo Garrone.
Really?
Based on the book Barbara. Yeah, I mean, I know my fucking filmmaking, bro.
Sorry, dude.
Yeah, you're talking to a master of the cinema here. Where did you go? I mean, I know Scorsese. If Scorsese directed Gomorrah, I would have known about it. But now that you're talking about Scorsese, I don't like Gomorrah. Don't get me wrong. I'm all about it. But have you never seen Casino?
I've seen Casino, yeah. Can't believe I was wrong on that. Fuck.
What?
I can't believe I was wrong on that. I'm rattled. I've been telling people Scorsese directed that film for years.
Well, you finally encountered someone who has a fucking Ivy League master's postdoctoral degree in film. And you've been corrected.
Yeah. Too
you
true.
Stand corrected. You stand corrected.
Indeed, I do. In a public setting, no less. How good.
Well, man, just to be quite clear, Sea of Darkness was never intended as a surfing movie, if you get my drift. It was intended as a movie. And, even though it's a documentary, I don't think we have to categorize ourselves in these generic labels. And I think that's the great failing of surf filmmaking, is that nobody ever saw it as anything more than surf porn. You know what I mean? They didn't see it as filmmaking. And except for me.
Mate.
The subject matter, it's still, to this day, I mean, it's still, even the best of it, like Taylor Steele's stuff or 100-Foot Wave. I mean, it's still surf porn. You know what I mean? It's not dealing with the socio-political issues that create this environment and how they came about. And I had an interesting conversation on the phone yesterday with Garrett McNamara. He called me from Europe. He wants to do a film on his life, and he has a really interesting life story.
Yeah, I bet.
And he comes from like a broken home and really serious drug-addled parents, kind of like the Marubera kind of thing. He never saw his mother and father after he was about 10 years old. Him and Liam. And I mean, it's really amazing how they pulled themselves up from their bootstraps. They were from the East Coast and only came to Hawaii when they were, I don't know how they ended up there, when they were in their teens. So they started surfing quite late. It's a very interesting story. I didn't know. I just always thought he was born in Hawaii. And I've known him and Liam for years. Anyway, we'll see how that goes. But
I love the sound of that. I loved Heavy Water, the Nate Fletcher doco that you made.
And even that, if you look at that, it's not intended as surf porn, right? It's got real hardcore narrative there about fear and death and pushing yourself to extremes and coming from dark, hard Scrabble backgrounds, you know, whether it's drug addiction or, you know, it's chosen darkness, you know, like having Jay Adams as a babysitter and the kind of socio ideological effect of that, you know, growing up in that environment. Also having Herbie Fletcher and Debbie Fletcher as parents. You know, I didn't get too deep into the family as I wanted to because they want the Herbie and Debbie wanted me to save that story for another time. But there's definitely a lot of conflict that underlies Nathan and Christian Fletcher, right?
Oh yeah.
And that, you know, I honestly would say that Christian Fletcher is the most innovative surfer of the postmodern era of the from the 1990s onward, wouldn't you say? I mean, all of modern aerial surfing is a footnote to what Christian Fletcher did in the late 80s and early 90s. I mean, he was so ahead. If you compare what Christian Fletcher was doing to what the ASP was doing, right? There's no real comparison as to who had more effect. I mean, here's another way to put it, right? Sean Thompson and Barton Lynch and Damian Hardman and Robert Bartholomew and all those guys, they had a very serious effect on the commercial exploitation of competitive surfing, right? I mean, they basically created this. I think it was Bobby Martinez who described it as trying to turn surfing into the World Tennis League, you know, like make.
I don't want to be a part of this dumb fucking wannabe tennis tour. It's in the intro to the show.
Right. Exactly right. One of my all-time favorite surfers. At that same time, in a parallel universe, Christian Fletcher was being booted out of the ASP. You remember how Sean Thompson, all those guys complained about him when he was like a top 16 surfer and he won trestles, doing all these aerial maneuvers. And of course, none of these guys could even do that stuff. Never mind understand why you would want to do that stuff. And the irony is now the ASC is the most winningest surfers on the ASC are the ones who are absolutely indebted to the legacy of Christian Fletcher, certainly not to the legacy of Sean Thompson or Robert Bartholomew or that style of surfing, you know? They're not, you know, you're not getting, you know, you really have to see that. And I'm not making a judgment that one style of surfing is better than the other, you know? I'm just saying that it's ironical that this dark force in the surfing world, and certainly Christian and his close friends like Matt Archibald and Jay Adams in the late 80s and 90s were certainly a dark force in the surfing world, you know, with their very explicit drug addictions and covered in tattoos and various hairstyles, and this absolutely radical aerial approach to surfing was not accepted in the mainstream of surfing at that point, right? Was it? I don't think.
No, not at all. And watching your film, it was interesting actually, you know, seeing that classical speed freak iconography, the hairdos, the face tats, that kind of steampunk, futuristic punk look, like that was all really born out of that urban West Coast skate and surf culture. And it really got me thinking a lot about surfing and skate culture. You know, these are really new cultures. They're very man-made cultures. And the roots of these cultures, like in that American scene anyway, like the Christian Fletcher, Christian Hosoi, Jay Adams, Nate Fletcher scene, it's so mired in this heavy drug abuse and this kind of dilapidated urban landscape and this like...
Well, it's America. I mean, that's the United States. It's just, you know, the United States, we are so close to South America, right? That it's not like, if Sea of Darkness is about how, is really about how do we get some cocaine to Australia? You know what I mean? That's what the movie's really about. How do we get a kilo of pure coke to Australia? They got all these great ways. where they have no fucking cocaine, right? On the other hand, the United States is just, and you can use that as your quote line, right? But
Yeah.
your log line. But the United States is like, you know, a couple of plane hops away from fucking Colombia and Peru and Mexico, and you know, it's mired in fucking drugs. It's and it always has been. I mean, that's what's terrifying and wonderful about capitalist culture in its essence, which is America, right? Which is sort of, is that for every $1 million success story, there's just a trillion failed dreams wandering through the Negro streets of dawn at dawn, looking for an angry fix, as Allen Ginsberg wrote in Howl, right? You know, they're just those lost, pathetic losers living on the outskirts of Golgotha, you know, on the back roads of Babylon, right? That's where they live in, right? There's like New York City's like, you know, 10 miles of incredibly expensive high-end real estate, just surrounded by square mile upon square mile of disintegrating buildings. And you know, it's certainly less so now, but there's still, the projects just stretch for untold square miles of poverty and drug abuse and violence and crime around this hegemonic core of wealth. And that's kind of the iconography, the architectural iconography of every American city. I mean, you know, they're all like these enclaves of wealth surrounded by disintegration and poverty, right? And so I think, you know, surf culture is a very strong reflection of that. So is rap music. So is the blues. I mean, all the great things that came out of America, rock and roll, they all came out of the poverty-stricken extremes, right? And then moved into main culture. They got absorbed by capital as entrepreneurs saw a way to make money through these nascent subcultures. They exploited them. And along the way, the early proponents of these cultures, be they black bluesmen, right, who got stiffed for their royalties by huge pop acts like Led Zeppelin, right? I mean, Led Zeppelin was just copying fucking, you know, Robert Johnson and Muddy Waters. They got sued by all those guys. Willie Dixon sued them, you know, successfully, right?
Wow.
For ripping off all their lick stuff. I mean, that's just one instance. I mean, for all the rappers that were really successful, the guys who started it all, like Curtis Blow and Africa Bombada and the new poets of the Lost City, they ended up fucking penniless just about, right? That's in rap too, you know. The same goes for all other subcultures, you know. And definitely in surfing.
Simon Anderson and the Thruster.
Well, I think Simon Anderson made some money, but I mean, you know, he's still. But I mean, I'm thinking more of, you know, because you know, I mean, we can, you know, the thruster innovation is a whole nother story, because we have to then address the Bonzer, and we have to address, you know, Malcolm and Duncan Campbell and various contributions that were happening simultaneously to Simon Anderson's contribution, you know.
Hey, back
but
to
he
the
did all right for himself. He sells a lot of boards, doesn't he?
Well, I mean, there was definitely some lean years there, and I think that he, given the insane ramifications of that design, he definitely did not benefit.
I never ride them. I barely ever ride a thruster.
No,
I mean, I'm much more into forefins. I love forefin. If I'm into a high performance board, not that I'm, you know, I'm getting really old now, so it's like high performance is barely what I'd call my surfing. stumbling to my feet. Gunter and I have these conversations all the time about getting up, but I still like, if I get onto a good wave, I really like being, my four fin. I mean, for me, I give Carl Smith a lot more credit for innovating. That's my kind of board. Gunter made me a replica of a Carl Smith 8-channel single fin, fucking kick-ass board.
Wow.
I think fins were designed to be moved around and changed. I think again, it's part of the reason the thruster just became fashionable because of the homogeneity of commercial and competitive surfing. But I never really cared for that kind of surfing anyway. I mean, I come from that soul. For me, you didn't see Jerry Lopez in a whole lot of competitions. You know what I mean? Occasional, but nothing really. I mean, he kind of later on lent his name to the Pipeline Masters, but in general, my tendencies would be, surfers that I love would be like, guys like Craig Anderson or those kind of guys who are riding all sorts of different boards, right? And Wayne Lynch is my hero,
man.
And so my point that I'm making here is, yes, the thruster is the perfect thing that got the perfect starter board that went down that generic ASP WSL style of surfing, right? And Christian Fletcher is like those old black blues guys and early hip hop artists who didn't really get the financial rewards for their fucking innovation, which is, dude, Christian Fletcher is 100 times more innovative than Simon Anderson. I'm so sorry. I don't give a fuck about the thruster. It's just 3 fins, and then there's 4 fins, and then there's 1 fin and 2 side fins and all that shit. That's just fins. That's just boards. Christian Fletcher's fucking flying through the air and doing air reverses and fucking switch footing at Pipeline and fucking, his father did the first jet ski tow-ins way before Laird Hamilton even was out of his diapers, right? Those are the guys, I give Martin Potter a lot more credit for innovation before I'm going to give it to Simon Anderson for the thruster. You know what I mean? Yes, the thruster was a great innovation, if you like that kind of style of surfing. And, it's perfect for a certain kind of, in the box, traditional competitive surfing and other kinds of, we got to, but I mean, to Kelly Slater's credit, because he is the most in the box surfer ever, and the greatest of all time competitively, right? I don't necessarily think he's the greatest surfer of all time. He's a great surfer, and it's really magic to watch him at Big Pipeline for sure, right? Usually he's on a 4 fin. I mean, Kelly and 4 fins were really popularized by Nathan.
Yeah.
Fletcher, actually. I mean, part of the whole thrust, no pun intended, Simon Anderson, part of the whole thrust of heavy water is to tangle with those kind of trajectories of surfing, right? But really, my money's always on the dark horses. It always has been, because I'm a dark horse. I'm just like one of those kind of guys. I never really made any money out of this shit. I mean, ever since I made Sea of Darkness, I've spent my whole 10 years battling with fucking Martin Daly about, getting the vision of the movie out there, right? As opposed to Martin's vision of the universe. I mean, it's just that kind of shit, right? It's capital versus creativity.
Mate, talk to us about the film, because there's listeners that won't have seen it. And in my mind, it's the greatest surf film ever made, the best. In my mind as well. Yeah, that's unsurprising. But no, it's amazing.
In Martin's mind. Martin's told me countless times that it's a total piece of shit. He's like the most disgruntled motherfucker about that film you could possibly be, right? Which is really sad, because it was an amazing collaboration with him.
Mate, it's an amazing film. And I mean, just tell us about the thrust of the narrative and some of the characters for those who haven't seen it, and maybe where they can even see it. I know it's kicking around on a bunch of fucking hard drives.
I'm not allowed to know where you can see it. So yeah, I don't want to.
I'm probably not even allowed to say that.
Just to be clear,
It's around. If you
I've
ask within your surf community, someone will likely have it.
I've never released a copy of it to any unauthorized place. It was sent to a couple of film festivals with Martin's permission, and they were supposed to be trusted venues, and obviously someone somewhere along the line duplicated it and made a copy of it. I mean, Taylor Steele once sent me a picture of a copy that he had that had obviously come from a film festival somewhere, right? So, but I've never, it would never be in my interests to release that film, right? Without getting any commercial return, both for the money that Martin put in and for the time that I put in,
Totally.
So we've never got any money back. I'm really want to make a commercial deal, of some sort, and get Martin his money back. But there's always various kinds of impediments to these. We've had so many deals, he shot them all down. It's a real bummer. I mean, right out the gate, the company that later became Red Bull Media House, all those guys wanted to distribute the movie, and they had money. Mm-hmm. They were right behind it, and I couldn't get Martin to agree to do it. So that's always been the issue, It's not really a mystery why it didn't come out. It's just he's never felt comfortable with it coming out. Maybe I'm going to be able to convince him now, but we'll see. I'm really trying. But the film was designed like a funnel, right? It started off in a kind of global description of the world in that time in the 1970s after Vietnam. And I got John Milius, who wrote Apocalypse Now, because the film Sea of Darkness, I got that title from Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, right? And the film was, in my mind, inspired by the Charlie Don't Surf episode in Apocalypse Now that John had written. And I had gotten friendly with John through a friend of mine, Bill McDonald. And John had been a surfer, and he was close with Eddie Rothman, and he was an honorary member of the Dahui, and he directed Big Wednesday, and he grew up with Mickey Dora, and he was part of the original Malibu crew. And so I spent a long time of a certain portion of my life hanging out with John Milius. And notwithstanding his incredibly right-wing authoritarian views, right?
Wow,
he was one of those kind of, oh yeah, absolutely, very much like a right-wing American ideologue. Like a lot of these guys, like Bill McDonald, who produced The Saint, and who was a writing and producing partner with John Milius on a number of projects. These guys were really proto-Trumpians, right? They were libertarian semi-fascists, as far as I was concerned. They really, their view of the world is very much what underlies Steve Bannon. I mean, Bill McDonald gave Steve Bannon his first office job in America,
wow.
in Los Angeles, and he was John Milius's closest associate. So I know those guys well, and even though I come from a very different political viewpoint, I was very friendly with them because they are some of the brightest guys I've ever met in my life. And I listened to them. So I spent a lot of time with John and heard a lot of amazing surfing stories, right? Especially one of my biggest questions I put to him is why because he knew Mickey Dora so well, right? And he grew up with him. And because he had such power in the film world at a certain point, when he'd written Apocalypse Now and he'd done Big Wednesday and Conan the Barbarian and all these huge movies, right? I said, why didn't you make the Mickey Dora story? And he said, because Mickey Dora was the greatest tragedy I'd ever encountered in my life. He was just like a waste of brilliance, right? And he said he was one of the, when they were teenagers, he would go to Mickey Dora's apartment in Brentwood, and the walls were just lined with books on existentialism, Sartre and Camus, and beat poetry, Ferlinghetti, and Ginsberg and Burroughs. He said Mickey Dora was incredibly well read and incredibly aware of the culture around him, and was an absolute waste in Milius's mind that he couldn't put himself to better creative use, but succumbed to a kind of feral narcissism, right?
Couldn't capitalize on his talents. Maybe he didn't want to capitalize on his talents. Maybe that's the core of surfing, is that Milius never understood.
No, you're missing my point. I don't think the word is capitalize. You know, I think the word is narcissism. And it is the exact same. It is the exact same narrative underpinning Sea of Darkness, right? I learned this from Milius, right? Milius saw the surfing activity in its purest form as feral narcissism, right? Feral in as much as,
it's funny.
What's my term? I have to say, Milius did not use the term feral narcissism. My encapsulation of Milius's analysis is feral narcissism, right? That, like he said in the movie, he says, once you go Asiatic, you don't come back, right? Meaning, once you took that turn, be it in the Vietnam War, which is where most of this, in that funnel metaphor that I use, that global view of the world at that point, is you've got all of these milieus blending in Vietnam. You have Australians fighting in Vietnam, and you have Americans fighting in Vietnam, and you have people coming from all these different cultures, right, in this melting pot. But you're right there in the Golden Triangle near Myanmar and Thailand, and the place, and it's the 60s, and there's drugs everywhere, and there's Thai stick and heroin, and it's just awash with drugs, right? And there isn't this kind of anti-drug culture yet that develops later on in the early 70s, the kind of sobriety culture, you know, when people realize, well, you can't actually, you know, the big rock stars like Bob Dylan and Mick Jagger and you know, Led Zeppelin. Well, we can't actually make our hundreds of millions of dollars if we got a needle in our arm all the time, right? We need to get back to work here, right? Else we're going to lose all our money, right? Or something like that. That's what I'd call capitalizing thereon, right? I don't think in Milius's rendition of that failing of Mickey Dora that it was a failure to capitalize, right? It was the fact that when you got absorbed into this counterculture in a certain way, right, you kind of went down the rabbit hole. And that rabbit hole is feral because you're living outside of the cities, and you're living outside of urban culture, and you're living outside of, you know, a bathtub and a shower and a bar of soap, you know, you're
because you got no money.
Exactly.
You've chosen to surf instead of pursue professional.
You find subsistence ways to live because it is a counterculture. It is an alternate culture. And you're absorbed in this narcissistic activity because surfing, as opposed to playing the guitar or writing poetry or whatever, surfing's closest byproduct that it produces that leaves an impression that is enduring and cultural and therefore sociological is when people like Jack McCoy and Dick Hoole pitched up with their cameras and filmed it, right? You know, albeit Jack McCoy's movies never rise above surf porn. To me, again, it's right in that pornography zone. That's not a pejorative description. It's just where they locate themselves ideologically for me, right? They don't interrogate critically the culture, right? And part of the reason they don't interrogate the culture critically is because they're absorbed in their own narcissism, right? They're encapsulated by the mirror image of themselves, right? That's what they're doing. They're mirroring what's taking place. And why Sea of Darkness was a big surprise to everybody was that it critically interpolated itself into that culture. And instead of saying, well, this is wonderful and this is what we need to do, right? And this is how let's go, instead of this kind of Zen-like immersion in an endless orgy of wave orgasms, right? Which is surf porn, right? It's just like, how many times can I come in a barrel of G-Land, right? You know what I mean? It's personified by Ricky Rasmussen in that great sequence where he's fucking smacked out on heroin and getting barreled at the same time. It's kind of like fucking a girl after you've done a big line of coke, right? Or getting her to suck coke off your dick, or licking her pussy with coke on it, right? It's the same thing, right? Except it's now, the narcissism is so complete in surfing that we don't even need a girl. We don't need anybody. We've just got me, the wave, and the drug. And I can't even think how many years I spent as a kid getting high out of my fucking mind, dropping into waves at Cormouta and J Bay and Vic Bay in South Africa. I didn't care about fucking girls, even though I was probably at my most physically appealing, right? All young surfers and young bucks between 16 and 25, or, guys who surf a lot, right? You are super fit. So when you get to 70 like me, you still look really good because you've surfed your whole fucking life, right? But when you're 18, you're really looking good. You're like thin and lean, and you got long fucking hair down your shoulders. And all these chicks are fucking falling over their fucking, dropping out of their bikinis for you. But you don't give a fuck because you want to just get high and surf, right? That was my experience anyway, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I could really relate. I had no desire to make money from surfing. I had a desire to make surfing from surfing. So I could spend hours out in the ocean at J Bay or wherever I was going, right? I wasn't perfecting maneuvers that would get me points in a competition. Albeit, I'll never forget the first time I saw a 14-year-old Sean Thompson ride super tubes. It was absolutely insane, right? How good he was. And it blew my mind. I'd never seen anybody get barreled that long and be able to stay in a barrel that long and then make it, right? But he saw that framework as an economic framework, as you said, and something you could capitalize on, right? Whereas I just saw it as pure ecstasy. And that was the difference in the late 60s and early 70s between soul surfers and competitive surfers, right? So I'm still tracking the same conversation that we had right at the beginning of this talk, comparing Christian Fletcher and Nathan Fletcher to Sean Thompson and Simon Anderson and these two different trajectories, right? And it gets back to the question is, well, Simon Anderson did the most innovative thing in surfing on surfboards, and I'm questioning that because I'd rather ride a Bonzer any day. I mean, I think Malcolm Campbell is the most innovative shaper in surfing, or Ben Iper, you know what I mean? So there's a lot more to that one than the fact. Yes, Simon Anderson should have, because his design was so commodifiable, because his design was so easy to use, because his design worked so well in the box surfing, he should have fucking patented it, and then ASP and the World Surf League would have had to pay him royalties every time they trotted their boards, because they're the best all-round competitive boards. They don't just when you're on a rail on a forefin, you suddenly just catch all four fins, you're fucked, dude.
Yeah. Similar to Mickey
So
Dora.
that's my point. My point is there are these two parallel universes that take place in all enterprises, and especially in all subcultures that come from a soulful root. And Sea of Darkness addresses that. That's what this film is about, right? It addresses that. I knew in 2008, 2009, when I was doing this film, that nobody had ever done a surf film like this. that nobody, I didn't even have the intellectual wherewithal to do this. I mean, certainly John Milius probably could have done it, but he was such a fucking right-wing authoritarian, totalitarian, that he didn't think in terms of challenging cultures per se. He was very good at critically analyzing them, but that's why he was so successful commercially, whereas I wasn't, because I was always fucking critically analyzing everybody like a dumb fucking Marxist educated. I mean, I just studied with too many Marxists, and post-Marxists and structuralists and post-structuralists, and I studied with Deleuze and Guattari and Lacan and Baudrillard, and my main mentor was Sylvain L'Étranger, who published semiotext. You should go and look at semiotext, right? And look at schizoculture and polysexuality.
Schizoculture sounds right up my alley.
Yeah, and we did it in I think 1981 or 82. We were just light years ahead of the world, right? So it's like time for surfing to catch up to me, right? Or not. I mean, maybe they are in some ways, but it's like there's a long way to go because you really have to plow. That's why I like talking to you, Jed, because you have some of the artillery to understand more than the surf porn universe, right? That we're applying critical theory to this universe,
mate,
and we're analyzing, and that's what Sea of Darkness is really trying to do, and Heavy Water, and hopefully the new Sonny Garcia movie is going to blow the roof out of it. I'm just praying that my new financial partners actually come through so we can finish it, because it's like if Sea of Darkness deals with feral, narcissistic early surf culture and that divergence between soul surfing and the advent of surf industry, how like surf industry giants like Quicksilver and Rip Curl emerged out of that cocaine smuggling universe, right? And then they became the corporations that funded competitive surfing. It was all a nice big package so that we could have the lawn tennis version of surfing, right? Which culminates in Kelly Slater's, God forbid, fucking wave pool, where we have it so packaged that we can now go to the middle of the desert, press a button, and here come these perfectly articulated waves, which are, a phenomenon to behold. It's the only wave pool I've ever seen where the waves are critical, dangerous, powerful. I mean, it's something to see. It's a feat of engineering, and it's testament to Slater's maniacal genius. It's like that Paul Thomas Anderson film, There Will Be Blood, right? Like Slater's like that. But he's right in the box. He's not out of the box. It's like perfectly designed so that it could be packaged into the culture at large, commodified, and that's capitalizing on surfing. That's not what Milius's critique of Mickey Dora was. It wasn't that he could capitalize on surfing. It was that he didn't realize his capacity, his inner gifts. And it's born out. Have you read Mickey Dora's writings? Have you read all? You haven't?
No, I'd love to.
Well, why haven't you?
Oh, fuck. I didn't even know they existed till now.
Well, have you not studied history, young man?
Bits and bobs here and there.
Apparently, little sinkers and bobs, my man. Well, I think you need to go and look at some old surfer magazines from the 80s when Mickey Dora completely left capitalist culture. He went from Guittari, which is a beautiful place, but being France, it's like the epitome of bourgeois capitalism, right? Extremely expensive. He went down to South Africa to live in J Bay when it was wild, where my brother Jonathan, may he rest in peace, was there with Ant van der Heerbel and the boys, and Desi Sawyer, Stevie's dad, another friend who grew up with me and Gunter, and they were living in the bush there, and that's when Mickey Dora was there. My brother was friends with him, And,
wow, didn't know he did time at J Bay.
Dora spent the entire 80s at J Bay running from the police. He was because he found a wonderful crime caper. You would go up to Namibia, the donkey, Skeleton Bay, the wave that surf line thinks they discovered. but which of course has been there for fucking decades, but just trying to keep secret in the Namibian desert. We were surfing that. I was telling Strider Wasilewski and I, we know each other from Venice, right? And I was, he was like raving because he finally got to surf the donkey, right? And how, it really is a fucking death barrel, dude. It's really scary. But that whole coastline, all the way from Cape Town up to Walvis Base, it's like about 800 miles of coast. It's just that it's like, that is the land of lefts. The other coast, J Bay, Vic Bay, are the land of rights. And it's that the Skeleton Coast is so dangerous. It's like desolate. It's a real desert, like the Kalahari Desert. It comes right down to the ocean, and the water is the ground is about 110 degrees, and the ocean is about 45 degrees, fucking freezing. I don't know what that is in Celsius, and they have rip currents that'll just suck you to your death. There's just nobody around. Paddling, I just remember paddling that whole coastline with my brother and my friends, and how intense, those, every time you paddled out, you checked yourself, and it wasn't just for the waves. It was whether this rip was going to drag you, to fucking the South Pole. It was that powerful, right? You were always, and that's why you get that perfectly lined up sand point, is from that insane dredging rip that's coming down at the same speed that wave is breaking in the opposite direction. So that's Mickey Dora. But in the sand around there are diamonds. It's one of the world's greatest repository of diamonds. And Mickey Dora would go up there on these surf trips, and he'd find these diamonds, and they illegal. Like, we grew up in South Africa with an idiom. It was called IDB dealing. And IDB was what all the old Jewish men would do. They would be going up there to the desert. We don't tell anybody. We come back with the diamond, the packet. They'd have these packets of paper with diamonds, right? And IDB was in Dad's business. That's what it stood for. But it also stood for illegal diamond buying.
Wow.
And there was this whole subculture of diamonds. So Dora was in his element. He could commit a crime in the part of the world where there was virtually no authority, right? Because the white South African police were so busy, like all fascist totalitarian states, desperately hanging on to preserving apartheid. It's kind of like Putin or Donald Trump. They're just desperate. That's another form of narcissism. They're definitely hanging on to preserving their own power structure, and they're completely oblivious to what's really going on around them until ultimately it leads to their own downfall, right? Mickey Dora capitalized on that. And his writings, there's some incredible articles in Surfer magazine that he would send these missives back from the west coast of Africa, talking about diamond dealing and surfing. And you've got to read that. That's your reading today.
Yeah. I'll try and track it down.
I think I should become a professor of surfing history and teach at a university.
100%, for sure. I this is
you
basically.
You can get me a job in Australia, because they probably won't have me here. I think they'd find some kind of predatorial accusation to level against me here in this kind of woke bullshit culture.
It's fascinating, the Mickey Dora yarn, because I see so many parallels with him and the modern incarnations, your Travis Potters, your Makala Jones, guys who were well aware that they were sitting on top of these immense resources in surfing uncrowded, perfect waves, but they were just so committed to not exposing them, and they lived feral, poor lives. Not MJ so much. He kind of.
Dude, I knew Makala. I met him quite a few times on the North Shore. He's one of the most superb human beings I ever met in my life. I mean, truly on another level. Talk about living in an alternate universe, right? But again, that was feral narcissism. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
it wasn't
exactly.
Like he was. But he had a very interesting take. You see, because Makala was a real artist. I mean, his GoPro photography is the best ever. Nobody did better than him. I mean, he is so considered and so intentional in what he's doing there with that work that it's transcendent. It goes beyond surf porn. It becomes performance art, because he was putting himself so at risk, and that's why he died, to take those shots. I mean, he would frame the shot. He knew exactly what he was doing, right? He would frame the shot so his arm with the GoPro was just out of the picture. The light was perfect. The barrel was, dude, that guy was a very intentional human being, right?
Mm.
So that's, I think, what Milius was getting at with Dora, is that the only times we saw that realized in Dora was when he wrote his own writings. That was where you caught glimpses of the magical creative brilliance of Dora. And the rest of the time, it was just narcissistic enterprise to keep the surfing going, which was the same as Mike Boyum in Sea of Darkness, right?
And so many others. Like these people's main goal is just to get perfect, uncrowded waves. But the moment they capitalize on their passion, they blow the waves out that they love, and they blow the sport out.
Martin Daly. That's why Martin's so reviled by a lot of these people, because he exploits it. I mean, Jack McCoy fucking hates Martin. I mean, I got myself into a hornet's nest of fucking insane vituperation doing this when I didn't even fucking know what I was putting my fucking foot into. It was like, Jesus Christ, I got stung by scorpions, you know?
Mate, exactly. That's the fine line that all surfers tread in the surf industry. Do I blow out the waves and the sport that I love for money, or do I just continue to live the feral narcissist existence with no family but rich on tubes where barrels are your currency? And
well, that's the reason why the two great places, which arguably have the best waves in the world, the most consistent, are the least inhabited, because they share an inhospitability to the average surfer. That, you know, which are the two places I'm going to say? You tell me. Let's see if you can think where are the two locations I'm going to give you. There's two locations that are filled with big ass fucking 8 to 20 foot fucking barrels.
Well, Africa would have to be. I mean,
South Africa's one, yeah.
Yeah.
And what's the other parallel? The other parallel universe, also incredibly underpopulated in its most wildest areas.
Potentially Australia.
Yeah, West Oz, dude. West Oz.
But these places are blown out now, man. They're fucking West Oz. It's not Africa. Africa, no. Australia is blown to smithereens, man. It's busy now.
But there's still a lot of desolate parts of West Oz still. I mean, I haven't been.
Not with waves. Like there's a couple. There is a couple, but there's honestly people are pretty onto it now. So. Yeah,
South Africa, the places where they're really good waves. I mean, J Bay, obviously, you know, the warmer regions are much more commodified, right? But the West Coast is fucking inhospitable, dude. It's it's just hard to live there, and it's really cold. It's really in the middle of fucking nowhere. There's like great white sharks everywhere. There's like fucking, what could destroy it is there's a lot of, because South Africa has so much illegitimate enterprises going on, it always has. There's a move afoot by mining. It's very mineral rich, diamond rich. There's all sorts of mining industries that are sort of moving into that area, and that could really fuck it up. You know, that I hope that doesn't happen. I know Twiggy Baker and a number, Alan Van Geysen, the photographer, and Matt Bromley, and a lot of the great South African feral surfers are doing their best to fight this incursion. And, obviously we would like to destroy all of these capitalist pigs coming in there.
It's interesting.
I think I need to do that. That's but they're not coming in there. I'm going to plug my phone in. They're not coming in there to do to build Juicy bourgeois, petty bourgeois Airbnb style 5-star hotels with spas like they do in Western Oz, right? They got a lot of that and vineyards and shit like that. They have that in Cape Town, and they have that on the Garden Route on the way to J Bay. But up by Swakopmund and Namibia and Walvis Bay and all that area, and the far northern regions of the Western Cape, it's much more about industry coming in and really fucking the place up, Yeah, so that's really terrifying.
That tends to be the case if it's a nice, the Garden Route says it all really. If it's nice and green, yeah, you can have your bourgeois enterprise. But if it's desert, you got to have mining, and West Australia is exactly the same. You know, down south
Exactly,
in
that's my
Margs,
point. I fucked up.
you got
I'm
vineyards.
staring at something just really beautiful. I'm going to show you. See, look, you see that? See that board up there?
Is that a bonsai? What is that?
That is one of the last boards Dick Brewer ever shaped before he died.
Wow.
When I won the Surfer Pole for the second time with Heavy Water, Derek Dorner, who has worked with me a bunch and who I love, Derek has worked with Dick for years, obviously, you know, being one of the greatest big wave riders of all time. And he had Dick shape me 2 boards to commemorate, because it was my second Surfer Pole Award. I don't think any filmmakers won it twice, you know, besides me, that I know about. And Dick made me these 2 red and yellow boards like that. One's a 7.6 replica of a pipeline that he'd made, but I actually own the original one as well from the 70s. But it's a bit delaminated, you know, it's old, right? And he remade that for me, and then he made this as a classic 10-foot, you know, Waimea gun.
Yeah, wow.
And
amazing.
They're signed, you know, to Michael, you know, Surfer Pole Award, Dick
Wow.
Brewer, glossed by Jack Reeves, you know, the legendary glosser. I'm never going to use them. I mean, they're just like the most precious boards.
Man,
I can't imagine how much money they're worth. You know,
one thing I love
definitely
about your story and your career is that it starts in surfing, and I can relate to this. It starts in surfing, but then it takes this grand arc through Europe, East Coast America, the major cities of the world, the major arts and culture hubs. But surfing is the thread that continues to tie your existence together, and it's done that.
And music.
Surfing and music. And I'm glad you mentioned that, man. Because in the midst of like these surf films you've made, you've done so much that people probably aren't aware of.
Look at my lounge. Look.
Wow.
Can you see?
Yeah, you got pianos and keyboards everywhere.
So this is a 1970s Fender Rhodes. This is a 1960 Hammond B3. This is a 1970 Revox tape deck to record on. Here's the piano from my parents' house in South Africa. I grew up with this piano. I had it shipped from South Africa.
That's classic.
Here's my synth. Look at all these vintage guitars, dude.
Wow. Man, that's wild. For those listening on the podcast.
Look at the Strat. Here's a 70s Strat. Yeah. Here's a 1933 National Steel. Here's a 1960s Hagstrom. So this is all the gear that I've collected over the years, because my closest friend growing up is a guy called Anton Fig. He's a drummer. He was the drummer of the David Letterman show. He's one of the most famous drummers in the world. He was the session drummer on all Cyndi Lauper, Girls Just Want to Have Fun, all that shit. He's the drummer on that. He played with Mick Jagger and with Dylan. And so Anton and I grew up surfing. We started surfing when we were before we were teenagers in South Africa, right? Because we were born on the beach in houses, adjacent houses. And we both had these big pianos because his mother and my uncle were musicians. So we grew up with music. So we always played after school. We would jam and play the piano. And Anton is played on just every soundtrack of every movie I've ever done with me. And I do a lot of my own scoring on my movies. I played on Heavy Water, like it's all scored by me and this incredible collaborator of mine, Paul Buchholz, who's an amazing young musician and editor, and right. And then Anton playing drums. Paul's a bass player. We scored the whole thing ourselves. We brought in Peter DiStefano from Porno for Pyros, and plays with Perry Farrell. And so the two threads. So Anton and I had surfing and music our whole lives, and filmmaking. I mean, I have cameras. My original 8mm camera that my dad bought me. When I saw them filming The Endless Summer on the beach in front of my parents' house in like '61, or whenever I was about 2 years old, I immediately wanted a surfboard and a film camera, and I got them both. So that filmmaking is I still have 8mm movies that my mom kept that I made when I was like 10, 11 years old. I have a whole bag of them in my studio.
Mm.
You know, so I've been very fortunate. You know, I'm not a rich guy, but I've been successful. I mean, I was one of the first music video directors in the world, right? I did the first rap. I did the first rap video on MTV.
Yeah, this is what I was heading towards. I mean, you look at your back catalog of work, and this is something that most people wouldn't be aware of, but some of the music videos, some of the artists you've worked with, Curtis Blow, Tommy Chong, Carlos Santana. I mean, Tommy Chong, obviously, but the
I love Tommy Chong, dude. Teacher, if you told me when I was 16, when I was smoking pipes of fucking Durban Poison and surfing and watching Cheech and Chong movies, that I was ever going to work with fucking Tommy Chong, I would have fucking never believed you.
I mean, what was that like?
It was fucking classic, dude. We just got stoned out of our brain. It was just like we were little kids, you know? It was fucking amazing. And I mean, more importantly, was like, did you think I would ever think that I was going to be having dinner with Bob Dylan, you know, and that kind of shit? Or, you know, having Eric Clapton try and steal my model girlfriend away from me when we were filming in the Royal Albert Hall with him and Carole King. You know, it's like, dude, it's been a pretty good ride when I think about it now, you know? I mean, it's weird because there was a lot of struggles and I had a lot of penniless times. And I don't even know how I managed to hang on to all this shit. Like, I lost a lot of it. I mean, there's stuff that I lost that I wish I had. But I mean, there are very few guys my age who've got it back, who have the fucking evidence of their life. So, you know, unless they grew up with a trust fund, it would be pretty hard to keep all this shit together the way I have, you know? I mean, I have fucking film going back to when I was 10 years old. I have the piano from my parents' house. I mean, how the fuck I did it, I don't know, you know? I just kept it together. You know, me and Anton were very lucky. He's a great drummer and musician, and we came to New York at the same time, right? And we started out, he would be playing in bands doing bar mitzvahs, and I would film them in Super 8 because there wasn't video back then. We were always enterprising, right? Because we didn't have any fucking trust funds. You know, we didn't have any money. I couldn't go back to South Africa. I was an army draft dodger, and I was illegal in America. I had to figure out a way how to fucking survive.
Wow.
You know, I couldn't go anywhere. I didn't even have a fucking visa to go in and out of America for the longest time. You know, I was fucked.
And there's a blessing in that because there's nowhere to go but up. You know, there's nothing to go back to.
Well, hold on a second. No. Down. There's a long route down, dude. Believe me, there's nowhere to go but up until you start going down. Because it's
but you have to get moving, right? You gotta make it work. You gotta hustle, and when you're hustling creative talents like yourself, you know, people pick up on that when someone is desperate but has high work ethic and discipline and talent, because talent comes on the back of work ethic and discipline. And but you need that grit. You need that lack of the safety net to really get you going, I reckon.
There's a great book written I think it was in the 60s or the 50s. I've been down so long, it looks like up to me. I can't remember who was. I think it was who wrote that book? You should look that up. I've been down so long, it looks like up to me. It's one of the Beats from the Beat generation. I think it's the brother of Joan Baez's girlfriend's sister, someone like. But he's a very famous writer, right? But you know, there is that you hopefully can rise out of the ashes like a phoenix and get on top of it. But I mean, for every Bob Dylan, there's just so many. You know, Phil Oakes was like the rival to Dylan at some point during the 60s, right? Who ended up killing himself because he just wasn't Dylan. He was, you know, Dylan said he's not a songwriter, he's a journalist.
Sure.
You know,
yeah,
that's, you know, with that sneer, right? But you know, so there's a lot of guys that fell by the wayside. I'm telling you that. It's like, you know. On the other hand, you got to think Andy Warhol, who's another guy that I hung out with. You got to think of what he said. You know, in the future, everybody will be famous for 15 minutes, and if you do the same thing long enough, you're bound to get into fashion. You know, and Andy Warhol knew this shit better than anybody, right? So, so there's that. But the funniest thing that I remember is when I bailed out of South Africa, I had a lot of, and I still have the negatives, thank God, black and white photographs of when I was on my surf trips. We would go through this area, the Transkei, which was this, I think I spoke about it last time, which was this attempt in apartheid to create this self-governing quasi-black independent state, so they could just
Nation of Islam kind of deal.
Yeah, just
not
ship black people there. Just ship black people there and leave them in poverty. But it turned out that the Transkei, where they were sending people to, which is where Mandela was actually born, was on the coastline of Coffee Bay and this incredible surf spots, right? That were back then were, you know, there was nobody out there. I used to surf by myself in these spots infested with Zambezi tiger sharks, right? Wow. You know, like you know, there was a thing, don't ever stand on the bottom of the ocean around there, because the sharks, these Zambezis, embed themselves in the mud under the ocean, right? And they won't touch you, but if you stand on them, they'll attack you, right? So if you wiped out in shallow water, you just swam. You didn't want to fucking ever hit the bottom, because you could hit a shark and then you'd be fucking just mauled to death, right? And we used to surf these places by ourselves. It was insane. But wow. I took photographs of the poverty-stricken blacks and, you know, what was going on. And when I came to London, when I have finally, you know, exiled myself out of South Africa for 10 years as an army draft dodger, I photographed, I took those photographs and sold them to the London Sunday Times. I still have all those negatives. I don't know how the fuck I kept all this shit. I mean, I lost a lot, but I've got a lot, you know? So I'm fucking grateful that I can sit here and, you know, the Museum of Modern Art in New York bought a bunch of my shit, like a lot of it, but there was just too, you know, so much. And now I sit back, I'm like working with Luke. I told you, Luke Cheadle and Stevie Dreer.
Yeah, well, that's right. Yeah.
Putting shows together. You know, it's like
epic.
There's a whole group of what's happened, guys in their 20s and 30s. There's like intellectual surfing culture has arrived. You know what I mean? People, even though you still need to read all the fucking things that I just told you about, right? But you've obviously had some education in critical theory and Marxism and a philosophical framework that we can address these subcultures in, so we don't fall into that feral narcissism that in the end has taken the lives of so many interesting guys who, well, besides Mickey Dora, I don't know how many of them actually had that much more to give. I mean, I'm not that turned on by reading a petty bourgeois surfing book like Waiting for the Barbarians. You know, that doesn't really interest me very much.
What was it? Barbarian Days. Barbarian Days.
Barbarian Days. Yeah, sorry, Waiting for the Barbarians is by J.M. Coetzee. That's an incredible book. Have you ever read that?
I haven't.
It's not about surfing.
Yeah.
You should read that. Waiting for the Barbarians by J.M. Coetzee. He's like a Nobel Prize winning South African author who bailed out of South Africa.
I'll chase it down.
Barbarian Days is just, I don't know, it's just, you know, like it's just got this kind of elitist attitude. You know, like when he visits South Africa about the same time as I was preparing to leave, you know, in like the early 80s, right? No, I mean 70s, late 70s. I left South Africa in 76. And he's got this kind of patronizing attitude as if he was the only anti-South Africa, anti-apartheid thinker in the surf world. And I'm going, the fuck is this guy? Me and my friend David Goldberg, who went on to become the head of the Institute of Humanities at UC Irvine. I mean, we'd been in jail for fighting apartheid. I'm going, who the fuck is this American talking shit here? You know? I mean, where the fuck did he get off? I mean, it is so patronizing, that chapter on Cape Town, that it just makes me question the whole book, you know? Again, it's just, as Bob Dylan would say, it's journalism. It's not poetry.
Man, yeah, I've read some of John Pilger's work on the apartheid death squads. You know, some of those Dutch special service maniacs who'd go around and kill anti-apartheid protesters, and you know these.
Oh yeah, I lived through that.
Awful,
Dude,
awful shit,
I remember,
man. Nazi shit.
I remember like like student protests in 1972 in St. George's Cathedral in Cape Town, which I filmed in Super 8, and I have all that, with
Wow.
like fucking those German Shepherd wolfhounds being unleashed on us by the police, right? I mean, just jumping at your neck, dude. It was like, I don't know how we you know, the priests of the parish of St. George's Cathedral just pulled us into the church and closed those doors. But a lot of us, especially the black guys, got to beat the shit out of them by these cops. I mean, it was terrifying. I'm right now working on a feature film that I'm trying to get a SAG waiver for, so that I can get out of this fucking strike. You know, I'm not all left wing and Marxist, by the way. You know, I mean, I think this kind of strike tactics are like 19th century kind of labor disputes in a postmodernist Deleuzian world. You know, in the world of like the great French writer Paul Virilio, where speed is a function, or Deleuze and Guattari describe the rhizomic aspect of the cultural organism, which is moving in such a viral way that you can't grab it. It's like COVID, you know? You can't fight dialectically. You can't fight COVID with one virus, one antivirus, right? Because as you get the antivirus, it mutates into it's COVID is the perfect metaphor for the postmodernist, post-Trumpian universe. That's what it is. It's no accident that it evolved in this particular moment in time, this virus, right? This virus, it's not some fucking conspiracy theory bullshit that these fucking weirdo QAnon people believe. It is a pure mutative version of the culture writ small in viral forms. It's just like what William Blake was writing about when he said, I can see the whole world in a grain of sand, right? That kind of, although that presupposes a kind of archetypal paradigmatic universe, which viruses don't, but it's still the symbolism of the virus, right? The fact that there's this deadly vaccine-defying viral organism that can just float through all the defense systems and just continually infect and kill people. That's the same way that capitalism has evolved. And so the same way that you can't just block a virus by putting up a vaccine gate, you can't stop the streamers and the big global multinational internet corporations like Zuckerberg and Musk. You can't stop their companies like Amazon Prime and Netflix, and you can't just block them and say, okay, we're not going to write any scripts and we're not going to act in any of your movies. So therefore, you'll pay us more money until we do. Because the rhizomic, which means like a kind of multiplying bacteriological metaphor for how the capital evolves in this, in this kind of post-crypto universe, post-cryptocurrency universe, right? Where just massive accumulations of capital happen in random places, right? And people just get enormously wealthy and powerful really fast, right? So it's kind of like trying to squeeze mercury. You can't hang on to mercury. It just shoots out in one, you grab it, it goes in another direction. By that same token, you can't fight them by blocking them, because you can't block them. You've got to fight them by working from inside them and infecting them. You've got to become like the virus itself, right? So the most effective tool against the strike, ironically, is a movie like Oppenheimer or Barbie that grosses, much as I have no desire to see Barbie, right? There's nothing in that movie that interests me at all, except the fact that it grossed $1 million at exactly that moment when the unions are trying to block all creativity from the streamers and the producers and everybody, in the hope that starving them will give them an opportunity to get more money. But you can't starve them because they've got a huge backlog of material that by the time they exhaust the backload of material, the union members will be starving. It's the only way that you can conjure up an attractive scenario that will invoke a desire to terminate the strike is when they see how much money a movie like Barbie makes, and they're going, "Ooh, well, we can't do that until the strike ends." So maybe that's a desire that to end the strike. You see, it's like a kind of an infestation from the interior of their organism.
It's a great take on the strike. I mean, yeah, and it makes sense. There's a lot of theory around, you know, the best way to fight back against late stage capitalism is to accrue as much capital as you can and then release it.
Pretty hard to accrue a lot of capital, but hey,
in ethical ways. It really is. It's so hard. And
well, you think Owen Wright? You think Owen Wright is a classic example of how to fight late stage capitalism?
Not at all. I don't think that's his concern whatsoever. But it is mine. And there is that line of thought that it really, you know, every dollar is a vote. So the more dollars you have,
so am I going to get a percentage of this podcast when it comes out because it's going to be so good?
Mate, well,
no, I don't want.
I still have.
I want to make sure this. I think we got some good shit, y'all. You got to do a good edit on this,
man. I was actually just thinking, it'd be great. I mean, it's up to you, but if you can get any of those black and white negatives or any of that Super 8 footage from the protest, any of that stuff, if it's lying around, sling it over and we'll slip it in.
Not lying around. I mean, I'm like so. My problem is that, you know, for all my protestations against capitalism, I got to work, and right now I'm about to, you know, because the strike is happening, I don't have another movie going, and I'm just waiting to see whether the funding is coming through on the Sunny thing. I have to, you know, my go-to job over the years has been music videos and TV commercials, and I have to put together a whole bunch of stuff for this big commercial proposal for this client. So I don't necessarily know that I have the time in the next week or so to do anything but do that, you know, because I'm sort of like a one-man show here, you know, like my fucking assistant she was so great, fucked off to Costa Rica to go surfing. Well, so hopefully she's back. I kind of really need her to go through all
fucking feral narcissist. What's she doing?
Yeah, she's very talented. She does photos for that girl surfing magazine, whatever it's called, the new one. What's the new one? Ms. Ocean? I don't know what it is.
I don't know. Man, the Sunny film. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I've obviously accrued a large archive. You know, I've been filming Sunny for God knows 12, 15 years, right? So I have great interviews with him, including the last interviews that were ever done with him, and actually some of the last interviews that we've done with Andy Irons. You know, a lot of people died on that project. Andy, Sunny, Marvin Foster, Dane Kealoha, Buttons, Brock Little. I got everybody in great interviews, right? So because they were all Sunny's friends, you know, and you know, and I've got various permutations and edits of it. Derek and Chaz did an interview with me. You know about this Instagram page, Free Sunny Garcia 2?
You were telling me about it in the
yeah,
last
you should
podcast.
see that. So you should see that, and you can.
Just quickly, what the premature demise of all these Hawaiian greats? Like, do you have any take on that?
Well,
John Shamuka is another one that is in that list.
John, I filmed John as well. I mean, there's a lot of. I mean, these are for the most part indigenous Hawaiians, right? And they come from a culture of cultural appropriation and colonialism, and they're without the critical apparatus to deal with that. And it's a very tough, hard scrabble culture, even though surfing is the traditional sport in Hawaii, and it's like you know, it's an indigenous cultural, religious and spiritual activity. It's hardly been commodified to the degree that it should have been, and it's in fact been appropriated by, you know, all of those white colonial surfers who came from Australia and South Africa and filmed the ASP, and you know, it's all pretty much discussed in, you know, There's quite a bit of it, although it's from a different perspective in Sean Thompson's movie that he made. But I can't remember what it was called. But it was that movie about when they were all getting beat up by Eddie Rothman,
busting down the door.
Busting down the door, exactly. But I mean, the difference between my perception of that and Sean's is that I see the only door that was getting bust down was the fucking door of the door of the door of the Hawaiians' natural heritage, right? That was being culturally appropriated and turned into a lawn tennis association. I mean, that's what that's about, right? Turning it into a business enterprise that used the sport as its kind of product, brand, and activity, but didn't acknowledge the indigenous roots. Nor were there any indigenous champions. I mean, certainly Dane Kealoha should have been like world champion many more times than Mark Richards, don't you think?
Oh,
I mean, never won one world title. Do you ever see Dane Kealoha surf at that time? It was insane.
Yeah, a magician at backdoor and pipeline.
Never. And Marvin Foster, none of those guys won anything. They didn't win the fucking world title. The world titles were all won by white guys. Until Sonny and Derek Ho came along, there were no real competitors coming close to all the white guys. White blonde Australians. Sonny talks about that very clearly in the film. That's what the film is about. So the film is definitely a trilogy of, the first part of the trilogy is Sea of Darkness, dealing with that feral narcissism and the origins of the surf industry and, surf culture and its kind of divergence between soul surfing and capitalism. And then the second part really is the Sonny Garcia movie, which deals with Hawaiian cultural appropriation and the exploitation of an indigenous culture for the self-aggrandizement of white blonde Australians and Americans. And then the third part would be Heavy Water, Nathan's film, which is about postmodernist surfing, right? And how the kind of feral narcissist culture reasserts itself in a kind of crazy, urban, ghettoized, speed metal, death punk rock kind of drug-infested skateboard surfing culture manifested by Jay Adams and Christian Fletcher.
I love it. The Mike Oblowitz box set. Are you serious, dude? I love that is a really coherent narrative thread that ties those three films together. Yeah. I guess the one thing though, the one thing I would say, guys like Rabbit, MR, these kind of poster boys of the ASP, these guys, MR, son of a used car salesman from working class in Newcastle or Port City. Rabbit, son of a single mom who, grew up.
No, I love it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not casting aspersions on these guys. Everybody has to make a living, and I fucking love Rabbit. And believe me, Rabbit's done as much heroin as anybody has.
Allegedly.
Yeah, but all these guys are cool. Mark Richards was a fantastic surfer. I'm just saying, ultimately,
and they were poor. They were poor people who were.
No. When we look at the broad sweep of history, I'm not knocking Sean Thompson. Dude, Sean Thompson surfed fucking backdoor pipeline on a single fin. I mean, Sean's cousin, Michael Thompson, who was my friend and who I adored and who I spent many great hours snorting cocaine with, was an incredible fucking surfer, dude. To my mind, he was the best guy at backdoor of his period, right? At pipe, backhanded pipe. He was just nuts, right? And he started Gotcha, right?
Of course,
and he was
yeah.
A great punk rock innovator, and that he's exactly
Gotcha, incredible label. So good. Wolfgang Block, the team, amazing.
Yeah, the
amazing.
design, everything. I mean, Mike was one of the most brilliant guys. Sean's no slouch either. He's very smart, and his brother Paul is an old surfing buddy of mine. So I'm not knocking these people. I'm just showing the lay of the land. I'm just saying there was this white, blonde, Australian, South African group of guys who appropriated indigenous culture to try and turn it into a kind of capitalist cultural institution along the lines of Formula One racing or professional tennis. That's what they did. I'm not saying it's good or bad, right? It's just so the Oblowitz box set is can still be enjoyed by people who don't think.
I love it, man. It's really fascinating. You've laid out 3 classical surfing archetypes here, and I don't think anyone could dispute them. You've got the feral narcissist, your Mickey Doras, your Travis Potters. You've got this Mike Boyum. You have this indigenous, traditional take on surfing from the native Hawaiians, the native Peruvians, and then you have
Felipe Poma, Sonny Garcia, Derek Ho, Marvin Foster, Dane Kealoha.
Yep. The Duke, and then you have the capitalizers, those who to make a living off surfing.
We got the postmodernists, the rock and roll guys, the guys who come straight out of the ghetto street culture.
Yes.
And shooting up speed and heroin speedballs and fucking, no fucks given, covered in tattoos, beating up gay guys, doing whatever, just pure transgression, right? And just taking surfing and skateboarding literally to new heights, taking it off the concrete and into the air, taking it out the water and into the air. And that's Jay Adams and that's Christian Fletcher, with a little bit of help from Martin Potter and Matt Archibald, but they were really the two spearheaded it in the gnarliest way and didn't give a fuck about competitive surfing. And, Christian Fletcher is no fucks given to this very day. He doesn't care about a fucking thing. He just, he is Mad Max, The thing that made Christian Fletcher happiest in terms of our relationship was when he found out I was making a movie with Mel Gibson. Dude, that fucking turned him on, dude. He called me from some desolate location somewhere in Southeast Asia or on the Philippines, wherever the fuck he was, surfing some barrel by himself, and just said, he said, "Hey Mike, I just want to tell you Mel's my fucking hero."
Oh shit. Yeah, I can imagine why. They both love a fiery fusillade tirade rant, the pair of them. And I'm glad you picked me up on that, because that's the 4th archetype. We missed one of the archetypes, and that is a very critical surfing archetype. And the 4th then being the capitalists, the squeaky clean on the weedy box, commercializing surfing.
The Bruce Raymonds, the Martin Dailies, the Bob McKnights, the guys trying to cellophane wrap surf tourism and surf culture and surf clothes and garments and sell it to the masses. And in the end, what happens, if they're lucky, their dream comes true and they get bought out by Walmart or some other big ass fucking corporation. They go public, and all of those beautiful.
The dream is complete.
The dream is complete. We've sold out completely. That's where we're at,
And Mickey Dora is one end of the spectrum, and that's the other end of the spectrum.
That's the other end of the spectrum, and everything else that comes in between can be found in my movies.
I love it, Mike. Mate,
all right, can I go surfing now? It's
you can go surfing now.
And I'm missing my tide, and I want to go. I scored myself a kind of Ryan Birch, Harrison Roach style, if you can't beat him, join him, like a 9.6 kind of weird. One of those pig longboards, like a big. They're kind of nice because they're not as easy to ride as a regular longboard.
Yeah, the capitalist wave pig longboard where you can just gorge on more than you deserve. Get more waves than you deserve.
This has got the hip, the wide part is in the tail with a pintail, and
wow.
The nose is narrow, so it's a lot harder to ride. It's a single fin, but boy, it goes good when you get a good one. Fuck it. So I'm doing that because the surf's just too small to ride a real board. It's like 2 to 3 feet right now. It's tiny.
Good on you, man, for having the versatility in your quiver.
I'm cross-stepping like a girl, I'm just like ballerina all the way up and down the board. So I want to go do that right now.
Surf is where you find it, as Lopez says, and absolutely legendary, mate. What a career. I'll be fascinated and hopeful to catch up with you again in the future. But man, from making films with Mel Gibson and Steven Seagal through to the greatest surf documentary ever made that's never been seen, and a couple that have, Heavy Water, and I can't wait for this the Sonny Garcia film. Hopefully that drops. all the music films, mate, all the cultural analysis and the touring through the doldrums of London, New York City, an absolute urban grime fest. It's a magical existence, mate. So full credit to you. Loved every minute of this. And mate, connect again in the future, hopefully.
Yeah. Just, you need any more, just call me. Just look at the swell charts, and if there's no swell happening, it's looking flat, I'm always happy to talk. If I'm not shooting a commercial or something, we're doing a movie, I just want to try and get transcripts of all these fucking podcasts and things I've done, because that's going to be how I can write my autobiography.
Easy,
So,
mate. We can figure something out there.
Save it all. Hey, if you want to get a catch up on and see some clips from the Sonny Garcia thing, then you should look at Free Sonny Garcia 2. And on one of their posts is they subclipped an interview that Chaz and Derek did with me on Beach Crypt on Sonny Garcia. Maybe you can find it in the Beach Crypt archive. But it's got some really good footage from the Sonny Garcia thing, and it would be kind of cool. You could put it in this podcast too.
Mate, 100%. I'm absolutely fascinated to see all that and hear all that. So, yeah, well done again.
Let's stay in touch, Jed. Okay, keep me posted.
Will do, Mike. Take care, brother. Hope you get a couple.
I will. Don't worry. Even if I have to, take out a few people along the way, you can be sure that it's not beneath me to snake. Malibu's like Kira, right? If you don't fucking go for it, you ain't gonna get one.
Snake or be snaked, my friend. Rip in.
That's how I live. All right, I'll speak to you soon. Thanks, Jed.
See you, brother. Take care.